Welcome everyone to this future-proof container terminal episode. Today we got a really interesting guest, Geesche Laksola, and I will define why interesting is not only due to her experiences, but also due to his background. And especially these days that we're hearing more and more about digital transformation, ecosystems evaluating per community system, how can they share data and get out the most out of data. It will be great to hear your thoughts. So with that being said, Geesche, welcome to the virtual stage.
Thank you so much, Chris. Thanks for having me and for this opportunity to talk about the blood vessels of digitalization and logistics.
Great. So Geesche, the plan is that together we have been putting some interesting thoughts and questions here into paper, and the plan is to go through them, and feel free to share your thoughts, lesson learned, and experiences on this journey.
We'll surely make that.
Great. So Geesche, for those who haven't got the chance to meet you yet, could you share a little bit more about who is Geesche?
Of course. So my name is Geesche Laksola. I'm currently working as the VP Business Development at Youredi, who's focusing on digitalization of supply chain and logistics through data connectivity. And in that role, I'm working with both our customers and our marketing, but also with our product development. And I've been in this role since 2 years now, also looking heavily into the ocean logistics and that digitalization journey of that industry. Prior to that, I have worked 15 years with logistics, digitalization, but with other modes of transport. So it's really cool and interesting to get into this more global and more broad scope of logistics.
Great to hear. And I always like to ask this question before starting the session, and I will also ask you this time. So how you define terminal operations in one word?
That's a tough one, but I think the word orchestration describes it best. So there's a lot of different instruments that need to be aligned, a lot of different parties in order to make the music sound good. A lot of complexity that you guys in the industry are handling.
Yeah, I think I always like to choose the word complexity, and it's not only due to the amount of constant changes, but it's also because especially ports and terminals are like nodes or some links between the whole supply chain. And I may say now that we are talking about data, the challenging part is to make data flow all the way around, no? And so they're available for everyone, and the specific moment when you need data. So it's quite interesting thing going on actually.
Exactly. Data is very often a topic that you talk about. I mean, big data is an important topic, but really how to make the data flow is something that very often remains in the background, and that companies and people don't talk so much about. But it's really the key to success in digitalization.
That's right. And jumping into the first topic of today, we are hearing a lot about system integrations, and the reality is that it's becoming more and more increasingly significant to our industry. So, my question here is why is this important, these days?
Systems integration, especially in the commerce, logistics, and especially intermodal logistics, that's really crucial, because there's a lot of really good applications now for automation, for digitalization of specific processes and ecosystems. But if you think of the environment of a terminal operator, right, a port, there's so many different parties that are cooperating in this space, and there's so many different nodes that need to be coordinated. And the more systems you have to automate processes, the more nodes, the more connections there are to orchestrate. So otherwise you have silos and islands of data that you can't really make use of unless you can share that data in an efficient way.
Yeah, good point. And well, we didn't discuss this one, but actually every time we're evaluating all this system integration, it's really important to map the actual process and then really explain the team how the process will look like. Because there is always a change in the way of working, and if you are not considering change management during the process is quite critical to succeed on those type of integrations.
Exactly. And we, in the field of integrations, we actually don't require our users to change their processes. We rather would like to understand their processes and then map basically the data connectivity operations to that process. And then you, of course, need to understand how the processes are run, how the operations are run, but also how the systems can talk to each other, how they interconnect. And there's a lot of translation work. So when talking about systems integration, I quite often make analogies to different areas of life that are more understandable or more close to our life. So if systems and digitalization can be compared to the human body, the integrations are the blood vessels, as said. So then we in data connectivity are the cardiologists of that business. And an open heart surgeon might be a bit more prominent, but you always need the cardiologist that keeps track of the vessels. And another good comparison is language and translation work. So if you have a good piece of literature, like a really good book, someone needs to translate it into all the most common languages for as many people as possible to make benefit out of that piece of literature. And that's exactly what we do and what needs to be done.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And then jump into the next one. Out there we are hearing more about different softwares, and in our industry, different platforms. We are hearing a lot of smart port systems, port community system, appointment systems, equipment related systems, AI everywhere, sometimes also used as a buzzword, but and you really need to take a look if that's really AI. But again, a lot of these topics out there, but how can we actually, what are your thoughts around this type of softwares and platform coming into this type of ecosystems these days?
Well, first of all, you have to start with what is the need, right? Do you want to increase the efficiency of your operations, or do you want to improve the customer experience? You should always focus on, this starting point, and don't get overwhelmed with all these buzzwords and new technology, AI, machine learning, all of that, digital twins. They are really good technology, but you need to start with the pain that you have, or with the goal for improvement that you have. And very often, this can also be done by pretty standard ways of solving. So for instance, a lot of the software that is already available, the systems and platforms in a port or with a terminal operator, let's say the terminal operating system, they might be traditional pieces of software that are not even in the cloud, that are locally installed, but they still can hold all the data that you need for your efficient operations, right? So you can also start with just collecting the data that you have, maybe in some silos, but collect it even with really traditional message formats like file-based, edifact technologies that have been invented decades ago. It's fine. It doesn't have to be always the latest cloud-based API. Start with the basics. Think about what you want, and try to make use of the data you already have available, and only then go out in the market and research what more modern options there are.
And I may say there is also an interesting topic going on within this data related topics on our ecosystem, and it's data ownership. And
yes.
And any thoughts around this?
Yeah, definitely. So data ownerships, and also the topic that you briefly touched upon before, the pod community systems. It's really important to understand who owns the data and for what purpose specific systems have been set up. So if you think of, for instance, vessel arrival data, that's something that the terminal operators hold. They are the best experts in in telling, when a vessel will arrive, how long it will take, when it will berth, when it will be able to be handled, and also when the containers will be handled. But that data might not be open. I mean, that's a commercial data is owned by a specific party, and a port community system might consume that data, but the port community system is by default only serving the players at the port. So there's a lot of external parties that are also interested in that data. Probably the whole world is interested when these like megaships are offloaded, so when the goods can reach the final destination. But are they really allowed to query the data? That's a good question. And also, is there some parties that would like to monetize that information? All this has to be taken into consideration.
Yeah, quite interesting, and well, we didn't put any topic related to cybersecurity within our script actually, but that's also a really interesting topic when it comes to to protecting data, sharing data, especially in our industry. A little mistake from that point of view can have a major impact in the whole supply chain.
Definitely. It's related to data ownership, so who should be able to access what data, but it's also a topic of basically data stability. So a concrete example, terminal operators used to have public web pages where they were informing the audience about vessel arrivals, right? And departure and arrival dates. So there were a lot of parties that were really heavily using those web pages, not only people like you and me just watching having a look at the web page, but robots accessing the web pages, so-called web scraping technology. And that was a very heavy burden on those pages. So they went down, right? And that's the same with operational systems. There's a lot of access to a specific system, they can cease to function. So that's why a lot of companies are now thinking about whom they want to share data with, through what kind of channels. And for instance, some terminal operators are replacing public websites with customer portals and developing their APIs, their integration interfaces, so that they have control on who is accessing their data to what extent. And that, of course, has a big impact on how data is available.
Yeah, really important. And, we are quite passionate about the logistics and the supply chain, but we're also passionate about technology. And when it comes to technology, it's constantly evolving. So there are a lot of emerging technologies going on. Some of them are not new, but we are hearing out there a lot of these, moving from EDA to API. That's really like a lot of things going on out there. Files-based, solutions. But do you got any thoughts around this? Because in reality, you need to identify your needs, and you need to make sure that you are at least solving those needs with the technology you are investing on.
Exactly. I'd like to quote actually one of our partners who's head of digitalization at one of the main terminal operating companies, and he said that APIs are not the magic bullet. And I really like that quote, because APIs are basically synchronous integration tools, cloud native ways to share information between two different systems, right? But they are doing the same thing than more traditional file-based integrations like EDI or even older standards. They're exchanging information from A to B. And it's more important to really think about what is the information you want to share with what party than exactly what the technology is that you're using. Also, APIs are still lacking standards. So APIs being cloud integration methods. There's not the amount of standards for the messaging isn't there. So in file-based integration, especially in global shipping, there is a standard called EDI, the EDIFACT standard, and in Europe, in the US, it's the ANSI X12 equivalent to it. that has basically increased the efficiency of messaging because many different parties can use the same type of messaging. So, for instance, in terminal operations, where you have a stowage or bay plan, there's specific types of edifact messages to digitize this information exchange. But these kind of standards aren't there for the cloud version of this messaging, i.e., for the APIs. Maybe you've heard about the DCSA, the Digital Container Shipping Association. That's basically a industry cooperation between the largest ocean shipping companies who have set out to migrate the messaging in the ocean shipping from EDI to API. But they're doing that from the perspective of an ocean carrier and their customers, i.e., a forwarder or a larger shipper. They have not yet gone to the scope of operational communication, i.e., of communication between, for instance, the ocean carriers and the terminal operators. And it will take quite some time before we will get to that space.
And I really like this topic because it's like really like region by region, and that lead us to the next topic. And we were talking about this ecosystem. I am aware you are talking to different links from the whole supply chain. By links, I mean different stakeholders, involved in that ecosystem. But the reality is that sometimes, even though, for example, if you got state-of-the-art technology in a terminal, that's, so to say, within your boundaries. Because if you're interacting with customs, with truck community systems, and with many other, parties, if they just, if they do not have the same level of technology and they're still doing a lot of paper stuff, it's really tricky. So what you consider is like the limiting factor. And again, this will be different to the US or Latin America or Asia or Europe, but in a high level, what you consider are some of the main limiting factors here?
Actually, I think that there's a lot of similarities across the regions there. So the limiting factors is very often whether you're focusing only on your closed system, on your operational efficiency within, for instance, a port or a specific terminal, or whether you are capable to include the external parties into the equation. And obviously, you need to do it because otherwise you would have the sub-optimization of your processes. If you have all the automation and the perfect planning for how to move a container from A to B within the terminal, but then an external party, the carriers, the trucking companies, the authorities, they are continuously bringing surprises like unexpected vessels or bottlenecks within the rail connections, or you name it, right? You will never be able to optimize your internal process. So you also need to make sure that you have as much information available from these external parties for your internal planning. And yeah, that information again requires integrations to many different parties.
Yeah, that's well, I got some previous experience on those, and they were not that easy to solve, but yeah, it's quite interesting, really.
One has to say, of course, that the ocean logistics and the terminals and ports in particular, they are probably the most complex ecosystems of logistics and business overall, because there's so many different modes of transport, types of organizations, commercial businesses, non-governmental organizations, societies, etc., that need to be orchestrated. So it's probably, the most difficult space to operate within, also from an integrations perspective, because all of these industries and fields or domains, they have their own technology and their own standards and requirements.
Yeah, I fully agree with you. And Geesche, one question. I know as within your role at Youredi, you're working on really cool projects. But could you share a little bit, about your journey these days, trends out there, how you are currently supporting customers out there?
Yeah, so there definitely is trend to go from traditional technology to more cloud technology, as I mentioned, from EDI to API. So that's of course very exciting from a technology perspective. But otherwise, I think it's really the orchestration between different needs and systems that is exciting, to being able to get into so many different areas of business by, when you do messaging and information exchange, you need to understand the underlying processes. So recently, for instance, we've looked into digitalizing the exchange for storage plans, right? For communication between an ocean carrier and the terminal for these complex messages. And we were wondering, why is the size of these messages so immense? Like, we have not really seen like so huge size before. And then I was explained, well, yeah, it's because of mega ships, right? If you have tens of thousands of TEU on a vessel, you also have quite a few rows of data within this message. And yeah, getting the connection between this operational improvement to the messaging is quite cool. Or then the same a type of connection, now that there's a lot of developments in more ecological friendly and more efficient fuel options. This also has an impact on the way how the messaging between the parties here has to operate. So because there's a lot of new things regarding dangerous goods that you need to take into account when you have a vessel that is fueled in a different way. So with all these kind of developments, it's much more crucial that you get very good quality information about the cargo that you're handling in order to have safe operations and efficient operations. So now it's not acceptable anymore that you get a container with dangerous goods that haven't been electronically pre-advised before. And that also means that the messaging in this field is increasing, and there's new standards of messages, for instance, for dangerous goods information that are required. So that's quite cool.
Yeah, and I don't know if you have noticed, but for example, in my case, these days supporting on the design aspect of terminals, customers are not only looking to achieve operational and financial targets, but also environmental targets. So have you noticed the same in your side, or?
Definitely, and environmental targets requires environmental reporting, and reporting requires data, right? You need to really get the facts on the table. You need to have the tools to optimize fuel efficiency, process efficiency. And what I think is really cool is that nowadays companies are possible to really follow up and report on these targets with real data rather than with proxies. Before, a lot of environmental reporting has been based on averages or assumptions that, for instance, what would be a fuel consumption on average per nautical mile passed. But nowadays, when you collect all this big data, you can actually do the reporting on facts. And of course, then once you have all the data, you can also optimize. There's a lot of really good software for ocean route optimization. Of course, the real-time berth planning, these kind of things are really good developments that required a lot of data.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. And I always like to say, like, it's not only a lot of data, but also reliable data.
Exactly.
It's really critical, actually.
Oh yeah, and there it's really important that you really look under the hood of the data connectivity solution you have, because a integration that could break is even worse than not having an integration at all. So companies should really audit the security, the stability of the systems through which they have their most important data flow.
I really like that phrase. Probably we can use that one for our next session. Geesche, to wrap up the session, what will be the final message to our colleagues, out there looking to to shift into, new type of technologies, find those improvement they are looking for. But again, they need to try to identify what is the best path, and then just
Definitely.
start walking through that path.
Yeah, I think maybe the starting point is that look at what you have right now. Try to map all the data that you have available in different systems, in different silos that you are working with already, and start with mapping that and thinking of how could you use that data in the most efficient way. And then, don't be afraid of using some old technology to extract that data for the initial mapping. And only then, when you have looked into what you have right now, think of how you can improve your processes and your customer experience with that. And only then go out and engage in RFPs and things like that with more kind of modern hip technology like the AI and these kind of topics, because then you're much better prepared to really add value to your operations.
Yeah, I fully agree with you, and it's really tricky to sometimes there are like what we call wants and must have, and to making a proper split and identify what you really need is the tricky part here, I may say.
Exactly.
So Geesche, I think that's all for today. I really appreciate you got some time to share your thoughts and lesson learned on this digitalization journey. But as I told you, you're always welcome to join the show and share your thoughts.
Thank you very much. This was really a great session and definitely looking forward to our next interaction.
Great. Thanks, Geesche.
Thank you.